today we're really going to be talking about productivity, resilience, and also mindset, and the fact that all of them really do intersect. And so I'm really excited about the content I'm going to be sharing. A lot of it are things that I've learned myself and I've sort of practiced. And a lot of it also comes from working with a lot of other leaders around the world. And so what I've done is I've sort of distilled 3 of my top tips, and I'm going to be giving some really practical advice, some really great examples, I think. And I'm also going to be taking everyone through a really simple activity as well to help them really think about where they should be spending their time and energy. Once again, for those of you who are just joining, I just want to make sure that you download the worksheet, because I know a few of you just joined in. I'll just put it in the chat again. Please make sure that you download the worksheet so you can follow along. You don't have to take too many notes. It already has some notes in there and some examples and things like that. So before I like to begin, I always want to make sure that people are in the right place. And so what I've done is just put some things down and hopefully they resonate with you. So you're definitely in the right place if you feel like you have like a million balls up in the air and that you're juggling so many different things and that you might miss something, all right? You're also in the right place if you feel like you have to wear so many different hats that some days you're not sure which hat to put on, okay? You're also in the right place if you feel like a bad leader or a bad business owner or a bad, solo entrepreneur, and that you feel like you're constantly winging it, right? You feel like a bit of maybe this imposter syndrome, right? You're definitely in the right place. You're also in the right place if you feel like you have to sort of constantly struggle to have a personal life. You feel like you have to even sometimes give up having a personal life in order to build a business, right? You're definitely in the right place if that's something that you feel. Another thing that you might be feeling is that you can't actually take time off. And then if you do take time off, you might feel a little bit guilty. And you might feel like ashamed about the fact that you're even guilty to take time off as well, all right? Last but not least, you might also feel like you don't have time to be strategic. Like there's never time to really take that step back to really get that global picture, right? So if any of those things, sort of come through or sort of resonate, let me know in the chat. I'd love to sort of hear from you, if that actually resonates, because if any of those things resonate with you, you are definitely in the right place. All right, so just let me know in the chat if that resonates with you. It also lets me know that people are awake and listening and also can hear me as well. So thank you so much, Mary. All right, great. So my goal at the end of the day is to make sure that I'm giving you super practical things that you can implement right away, okay? And before we get to actually the activity and some of the things that I hope that you'll be able to implement right away, I just want to quickly introduce myself. So hello, I always typically love to actually spell out my name. It's Akua. My father, who's Ghanaian, typically refers to me as Akua. My mom is American. She normally says Akua. And for most of the last 5 years, I've been in Nigeria, and they typically refer to me as Akua. I respond to any and all. I'm not picky about it. I'm a certified executive and leadership coach, and my favorite thing to do is support leaders so they can focus and connect to scale in their business or in their career. And at the end of the day, what this looks like is that I tend to work with leaders who are juggling many things, many projects, many stakeholders, and it's my job really to help them see where they need to not only focus their time, but also their energy each and every day. And my hope is that by going through this workshop with me, you'll also get a better idea of where you need to focus your time and energy each day as well. Okay, so at this point, I'd love to just invite everyone actually to just introduce themselves in the chat. I'd love to know where you're located and maybe even what you do. So maybe we can just take a second to do that, and I'll read them out as I see it, just because I love to get to know who's in the audience and yeah, where they're calling in from. Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel, calling in from California. Yes. And I'll let you know, I'm actually in Accra, Ghana right now. So I'm in West Africa. All right, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Yes, thank you, Dustin, for joining us. Welcome. Donna, based in Lagos. Oh, yay. Welcome, Donna. Yes. Brazil. Imani. Yes, New York. Thank you for joining us. Los Angeles. Love Africa. Whoop, whoop. Amazing. Have you been? South Florida. Thank you for joining us, Christina. All right, and as the rest of those come through, also more than happy to introduce people. Vivian, welcome, Vivian. Great. So here's the thing at the end of the day. I think at the end of the day, like all of my content, like everything I do, I feel like in the work that I do, one of the reasons why I think I'm a coach is really that we spend so much time giving. I think especially women entrepreneurs, women founders, women leaders, just women in general. We spend so much time giving that we tend to forget ourselves. We tend to take the time to actually check in. And so one of the things we actually will be doing in this workshop is checking in. And what we're going to be doing actually is leveraging this concept of self-leadership. I'm sure all of you on here identify with being a leader, and I would just love to just recommend that everyone also just take a second to think about things from the perspective of leading themselves first, right? I think we're so good at sort of giving, at doing, right, that we're not taking the time really to go inwards and check in about ourselves. So what is self-leadership and why is it an important concept? It's an important concept because at the end of the day, it's really hard for you to give. It's really hard for you to do if you yourself aren't emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, if that's important to you, or even financially aligned at the end of the day. It's really hard to do for others if you can't do it for yourself, right? You might be able to do that for a short period of time, but it's really hard to keep that up and be consistent with it if you yourself don't feel fulfilled, if you don't feel like some of these other needs are happening. So self-leadership and sort of the lens of this entire workshop is really about helping you set your own course, follow it, and most importantly, evolve if necessary. I think that another key sort of element of this presentation I'll be sharing with you is all about being able to evolve and being open to evolving as well, and not feeling ashamed for having to evolve or recognizing that you're evolving or guilty about it as well. Okay, so before we move forward, I just would love to just do a quick activity with everyone. And this quick activity, once again, if you haven't had a chance, just download the worksheet. It's online. I had the link there. If you want me to put the link in the chat again, I'm happy to do that. But we're going to just do a quick exercise just to take a second, a little breather, and to just check in and really see where we're at in some of these elements. And of course, because this is productivity related, we're going to focus mostly on our task and responsibilities. So what I'm going to ask everyone to do is actually just write down what comes first to mind, right? This is not meant to be a test. There is no right or wrong answer. It's just meant to be a brain dump. And so what we're going to do together is just write down what comes first, all right? Whatever comes to mind. You can type it directly into the document that I shared because it is a Google Doc, or you can write this down if that's easier for you, all right? So just a quick check-in. So the first thing we're going to be looking at are what are some of the tasks that, oh boy, and this is where it goes bad. What are some of the tasks that you actually love? All right. So if you're looking at the worksheet, it's really just the first thing. What are some of the tasks that you actually love doing? All right. You feel great doing it. You look forward to doing them. You simply just enjoy doing those tasks and responsibilities so very much. All right. Go ahead and write that down. I'm going to give you about a minute to do that. And while you're doing that, I'm also going to fix my presentation so we're on the right slide. Okay, so just write that down. Whatever comes to mind, there's no right, there's no wrong answer, whatever comes to mind in terms of tasks that you enjoy doing, responsibilities that you enjoy, both in your personal and your professional life. And one of the things you'll also learn about me is that I actually talk about the two because I believe the two go hand in hand. We tend to spend a lot of times trying to compartmentalize and feel like, okay, my life, my personal life is separate from my business life or separate from my company. At the end of the day, they're all somewhat intertwined, especially in the times that we now live in. All right. So if you feel like you have a good handle of some of the things that you feel like you're enjoying doing, you love doing, let's move on to the opposite of that. Okay. What are some of the things that you dread, all right, that you feel resentment towards, that you dislike doing immensely? Okay. That's really the second one. All right. So just take a second, once again, to just brain dump whatever comes to mind in terms of some of these tasks and responsibilities. What don't you like doing? Right, and put that down. And once again, if anything pops up, any sort of story, anything that comes up that sort of is resistance, just work through it and write it down anyway. This is not a test. There is no right or wrong answer. Just write down what comes to mind. All right, so let's get to the next one. Okay, so this next one is write down everything that you feel you're not very good at. Right? So you either feel incompetent doing it, or you make mistakes doing it, or you struggle through doing it. And sometimes I will say there is an overlap between the things we don't like doing and the things that we're not very good at. So just take a second to sort of see if there is a difference between some of the tasks and responsibilities that you put down, or if there's any overlap, and just indicate that. All right, we'll just give it another 30 seconds. All right, so let's move on to the last one. All right, in this last sort of bucket, I want you to write down all the tasks, responsibilities, things, right, related to getting things done, your business and your professional life, where you feel like you never have time to do them and you feel frustrated because you never seem to be able to get to it. You know, it's always elusive, right? It seems so far away. You want to create the time, but that time never seems like it's there. And once again, just write down whatever comes to mind. And as we go through this presentation, actually, more things might come to mind as well. All right, great. So we're just going to move on with the next sort of section of the workshop. But as we go through this, I really encourage you to, if something pops up, just continue to write it down and continue to add to the list at the end of the day. But let's get into sort of looking at some of these task responsibilities with the lens of self-leadership. And in my opinion, there are three basic things that we need to keep in mind in terms of self-leadership, especially in the times that we're in. One of the things I always love to talk a little bit about with my clients is this idea of going from surviving to thriving. So in order to get to this point where we feel like, okay, we're making progress, we're really thriving, we're not just doing things to do them, I think there are three things that we need to keep in mind. And this first thing, I think, is really strongly correlated with this one story that we tend to tell ourselves a lot of times as a leader. And that one story that we tend to tell ourselves is, I was never like this, or at least that's how it comes up for me. For other people, it might look a little bit different. It might look like, I don't do this. This is not my way of showing up. I can't do this. This is not me, right? There's so many different ways that this story potentially shows up. But I would say that for the most part, it might be some sort of story or thought like, I was never like this, okay? And I think the key thing to keep in mind in relation to this story that might come up in terms of thinking about how we show up, sort of working through, going from surviving to thriving, is really taking the time to recognize that we're constantly evolving, right? And giving ourselves grace to recognize that we're constantly evolving and taking the time to reflect and develop awareness about how our desires and vulnerabilities have shifted is super, super key at the end of the day. Just taking the time to get to know ourselves is super, super key. And actually, that's where a lot of our confidence actually can come from, right? And for me, one of the reasons why I wanted to include this is because for so many people that I've worked with, especially during this period of the pandemic, so many people get so hard on themselves, right? They constantly are saying things like, well, I was never like this. I was always very productive. I always got things done, not really recognizing that we are living in a bit of a different environment, not a bit, a very different environment, right? For so many of us, we are no longer working within the normal spaces that we work in, right? For so many of us, we went from cooking maybe twice a week, 3 times a week to cooking 7 days a week for months at a time because we weren't allowed to go out or even allowed necessarily to have food come in, really. So just really recognizing that we sometimes set very high expectations for ourselves as humans, and none of us are perfect, right? And so it's really important to recognize that there will always be ups and downs. And it's really important to recognize that the things that we consider to be important will change. The things that we love, the things that we hate, right, will change, right? Our strengths might change, right? Our weaknesses also might change. And I'm sure for many of you throughout this pandemic, right, it probably revealed certain things about you, about how you work, about how you show up that maybe were no longer working for you, right? And so the thought, right, the idea that something had to change or had to switch is probably something that came up for many of you, okay? So the sort of the mind shift or the thing I'd like for everyone to think about in terms of thinking about this first thought around, I was never like this, right, is just really recognizing that you don't have to have everything, including yourself, figured out. Really recognizing that you can take the time, day to day, week to week, month to month, potentially, to check in with yourself and to continue to build your own awareness around how you show up, and recognize that how you showed up yesterday might be even different from today. And that's absolutely okay, right? Giving yourself permission really to evolve can once again really free you up to be able to show up and get things done in a very different way. Okay, so the action I'd love for everyone just to keep in mind is check in with yourself regularly, right? Whether it's sort of, setting a date for yourself, thinking about journaling. I think there's so many different ways to do this, but just really take the time to check in with yourself and see whether or not some of the things that you thought were important to you are still important to you, whether some of those tasks and responsibilities that you still enjoy are things that you still enjoy. All right. So just some quick questions. And I also think that these are on the worksheet, but I was, just really curious. People can unmute or they can sort of put in the chat box if they're open to it. But did you learn anything new by just quickly going through this exercise of thinking about some of these tasks and responsibilities? And if so, what did you learn? What surprised you, or what was not a surprise? The next step, I think it really will depend on each individual. Sometimes, and this is my second step, actually, I'm just going to talk about it and then we'll get into it a little bit, is being able to ask for help. So really recognizing that sometimes, like, you can go online, you can Google, you can, maybe work with someone like me, like a coach, but it really might need an added, like an additional layer of support. So it's actually working with someone who's an actual mental health professional or a therapist potentially. So asking for help in that way might actually be more beneficial, but it's really going to depend on each individual. But I think if you first of all recognize it, at least acknowledge it, it's a lot easier to deal with. And for me, I always talk a lot about experimenting. So it's about experimenting with lots of different things. I'm sure this is going to come up later, but there are so many really interesting ways to start to engage with some of those anxious thoughts and start to think about where they're coming from, right? So is it about, for some people, they get anxious about having to do specific tasks, having to show up in a specific way. Some people are actually afraid of success. Others are afraid of failure. So it's like taking it a step further from, okay, I'm anxious, but trying to see what is potentially the root cause of that anxiety. And sometimes we're not able to do that on our own. So I think it's really just going to depend on how much is impacting you and whether or not it's something you want to invest in sort of moving forward. I hope that's helpful. Like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about that in some of the next slides, but that first step is really just recognizing that that is something that you're dealing with and that you want to do something about it. So I think it's a really great question. And hopefully some of the things I share in a bit will help with that as well. Anyone else? All right, so let's move on to the second one. So this second one, and this is really interesting because when I do this, sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, this is so simple. It sounds so easy. Yeah, it sounds super easy, but you'd be surprised the number of people who don't necessarily ask for help. So if you feel like this is something helpful for you, you can use this information to support somebody else. But one of the stories we do tell ourselves, especially when we get into a position of where we think we're in power or we're in a leadership position, or we feel like we've made it to a certain place, we find it really difficult actually to ask for help. Okay. And once again, a part of this has to do with the fact that as human beings, it's really, really hard for us to put ourselves in vulnerable situations. Okay. So I'd love to encourage everyone on here. And I think that your productivity will be directly correlated to your ability to stay open, your ability to want to engage with others and stay curious and open-minded. And I think that asking for help is really a part of that. Okay. And we do this because we really don't live in a vacuum and we're not going to be able to succeed in a vacuum. At the end of the day, we will need to be able to leverage our network, leverage individuals' support to really get to where we want to be. Right. And it's super scary asking for help. It's something that I had to learn. And I'm actually going to take you through a simple process that you can keep in mind for those of you who like sort of using frameworks and things to keep in mind to help you move forward. Because for me, at least, those frameworks give me a bit of confidence. But it's super scary to ask for help, right? We don't want to be rejected, right? We don't want to be vulnerable. For some of us, it might be like, oh, our status will be diminished. And a lot of us, it feels like we're letting go of control when we ask for help, right? So recognizing that we're really, really bad at it, I think also can once again just help us see that, okay, I'm not the only one. A lot of us really do have a hard time asking for help. So beyond some of the things that our brain does, right, to scare us, in terms of asking for help, Another thing that we're really bad at as human beings is articulating our needs. I don't know like how many of you guys have had this issue, and this problem with being able to articulate our needs also looks like it's really hard for us to delegate a lot of times also as leaders. And we tend to believe that our feelings, our thoughts, and our needs are obvious to other people. Happens all the time. Like it happens in personal relationships. It's like a really easy thing to see in personal relationships, but it's also something that we see in the workplace as well. And it's even more important when you're building a startup because, you know, a startup is all about personality at the end of the day when you first start off, right? It's really just about people and like pushing them as hard as possible and you working as hard as possible. And so if you don't feel comfortable, you know, communicating what you feel you need or the business needs, it's really hard for you to be able to move forward. So just really one, recognizing that we're terrible at asking for help as human beings. And two, we're terrible at articulating our needs as well, I think can be incredibly empowering. Okay. So the mindset reframe or the thing I want everyone to keep in mind is that it's okay to ask for help. Okay. And, you know, I was telling someone this the other day, like, it's really hard for us to ask for help, even when we're paying for it. I work with a lot of leaders who actually have a lot of guilt around asking people that they pay every single day to do something or get something done. So a part of it is that they don't want to add more to their plates potentially, but a lot of times the leaders aren't even aware of how much is on the plate of their employee. They just jump to this assumption that, oh, I don't want to give it to them because I don't want them to do more. I'm just going to add more to my plate. So they're overwhelmed a lot of times, but the member of their team isn't necessarily overwhelmed. And I also see this in a lot of people's personal life as well. So I'd love for everyone just to take a second and just sort of reflect on where can you potentially get some support when you think about some of those tasks and responsibilities that you put down, right? Where potentially could you get some support? Where could you potentially delegate? What could you potentially take off your plates? Okay, because it is okay to ask for help. So just take a look at the list that you put down, or even you can start to add more to some of the things that you've already written down. Circle them even, right? Where could you offload this? What could you take off? Who could support you with something on here in your personal, your professional life, right? And if it's not support, who could maybe hold you accountable, right? Maybe you just need someone to help remind you that something needs to be done and that's enough. Just take a second to do that on the worksheet. So let me talk a little bit about how to ask for help. So this is very general. Once again, like I said, I sort of was taking this more from a self-leadership perspective as opposed to like thinking about it within a team, just really for yourself when you're thinking about it. But for some of the things I've seen, and even for myself, really recognizing that a lot of times we're terrible at asking for what we need. So trying to be really specific. This can also be the case also when we're delegating, trying to be super, super specific. The second thing I see a lot of, especially women, do is apologizing or minimizing the fact that they need support. You know, I feel like that one sort of speaks for itself, but just really recognizing that you might be undercutting yourself by trying to apologize or minimize something that either you're paying for, that you deserve, or that you have no right feeling weird about, right? There's nothing wrong with asking for help. The third thing to keep in mind is to try and make it as personal as possible. You know, just really trying to personalize it when you ask, just not make it as, you know, not make it transactional, right? It's not like sort of tit for tat necessarily. And last but not least, if you do feel some way about sort of asking for support, just really making sure that you share the results that you get from whatever support that you got. If you delegated something, you know, express gratitude. Another thing I talk a lot about is the importance of being able to recognize people or reward people in a way that resonates with them. So if you know this person that you asked for support from or you got help from, make sure you thank them and express gratitude in a way that potentially resonates with them, right? So I think keeping those four things in mind, at least for me, really takes off a lot of pressure when I'm asking for help, right? It just gives me sort of these basic guidelines I can follow so that moving forward, I really know how I want to operate, right? In the chat, I see that Linda typed, yeah, sometimes I struggle with delegation. I want to be sure I'm delegating with the person's strengths in mind. Yeah. So that's something that we can do as leaders, right? Really just have that conversation with them to see what they're good at, what they want to maybe even get better at. But is it wrong to delegate with the intention of helping someone learn a new skill or grow into a particular area? Ooh, good question. Nope, it's not wrong to delegate in that way. Not at all. I will say one thing that you might want to keep in mind in terms of delegating is that sort of that why component. So if someone has expressed that they specifically want to learn a new skill, I definitely think reinforcing or just reiterating that you're giving them the specific task because they mentioned that this is something they want to do, or that you as a leader see that this is something that could potentially support them in their growth. I think that can go a long way in helping build both your relationship with that individual and also their motivation to want to get it done and learn as well, right? So I think there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. It's a really good question.
I was thinking about something too, Akua, as you were talking. I think that sometimes I think about I have to delegate the whole thing, and that's not always the case either, right? So for a project, sometimes I can delegate a piece or the starting point or something like that, and that sometimes helps me move delegation forward a little bit faster.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? So one of the things I also talk a lot about is this idea of separating projects from tasks. So many of us focus so much on these big overarching projects that have a lot of tasks in them. So if you don't feel comfortable giving over an entire task, just like Rachel said, think about, sorry, an entire project, think about a specific task you feel that person can get done, whether because it aligns with their strengths or it aligns with something they're looking to learn. It's a really good point, right? And once again, can help reduce some of that anxiety, right? Especially if you feel like I can't let go. It's my baby. I need to do it, right? Give them a small piece to do to support you so that you can at least have a bit more bandwidth to work on other parts. All right. So my action for you really is just to just learn how to ask for help and really recognize and become aware, right, of some of these thoughts you might have, these stories you're telling yourself around delegation or around getting that support, okay? And really think about how you can work through that and shift some of those stories, especially if it's not serving you, especially if you feel like you're not being able to grow your business or you can't get to the next level in your career because you can't hand off some of these pieces. All right, so let's get into the third thought. So the third thought I have is a lot of times the story that we tell ourselves that I can't let go, right? It's sort of like this story of something maybe happened in the past and I feel like it's going to happen again and it will happen again and I'm sort of stuck, right? You're just sort of just constantly thinking about like, I can't let this go. It's going to keep coming back. Like, you know, I can't move forward because of this, all right? That might be potentially the story that you're telling yourself. And so one of the ways I think about this is really just sort of being kind to yourself and sort of being open to sort of working through it and working through any guilt that you might have, right? And the way I see this sort of showing up is these expectations that we tend to put on ourselves as leaders, as high achievers, as people who are highly ambitious. We sometimes can really get stuck because of something maybe not going our way or failing at something, or maybe pissing somebody off or letting even ourselves down. And so it's really important that as leaders, we recognize that we are setting expectations of ourselves and others, whether they are spoken or unspoken. And if anything, a lot of our expectations are actually unspoken. There are a lot of things that we expect from ourselves and others, and we don't always even recognize it. Some of it just comes from how we're socialized, conditioning, right? We should just like, those things should just happen. People should just be that way. And so it's really important that we build our awareness around what some of those expectations are. And even more importantly, recognize that sometimes for us to be able to grow, to be able to scale, to be the best leaders that we can be, to be able to impact more people and grow, we really need to be we need self-compassion. And I like to describe it more as sort of self-forgiveness at the end of the day. And, you know, forgiveness means that you are accepting something that you've done, or if you accepted something that has happened or that someone else has done to you, and you're willing to sort of move past it. And you're not just sort of stuck, right? You're not like just constantly focused on it, because being constantly focused on that is usually being focused on the past. And if you're focused on the past, you really can't be present. And it's really hard for you to be productive and get things done right now at the end of the day. So I'd love to maybe just sort of stop here and give you guys an opportunity to go back and look at the list that you put together and sort of just see to yourself, like, you know, are there any tasks or responsibilities on that list that you might feel guilty about? You might feel guilty doing, that you might need to just sort of forgive and sort of let go potentially, right? You might feel some sort of shame towards even thinking that, you have to give it to somebody else to do, or it might be something that you no longer even want to do. All right. So maybe just take a second and think about that. In terms of thinking about sort of self-forgiveness, I just wanted to give a few tips to sort of keep in mind. And once again, this can also sort of be used in situations where maybe you don't feel as comfortable as well, right? And that first step, when you recognize that you don't feel as comfortable, like, so for example, just what someone just shared in terms of like self-promotion, like acknowledge it, acknowledge that maybe it's awkward to put yourself out there in that way, right? Acknowledge that it might be a bit hard for you, right? I think that can be, once again, incredibly empowering. And when we're thinking about forgiveness, or self-forgiveness, it's really about, right, taking that responsibility, accepting impact, acknowledging, right? How you feel about something. And that's really what's going to allow you to sort of work through it and recognize that there is a greater good that comes out of it. The second step is, once again, really about expressing it. So you've acknowledged it, you're aware of it, express it, talk about it, write about it, potentially even work through it, experience those emotions, because that's really how, once again, you're going to get to the other side. If you repress it, if you push it down, if you ignore it, it's going to be, it might come back in other ways, right? So really just, acknowledge, work through it, right? The third thing, and this is more specifically for thinking about forgiveness or self-forgiveness, think about how you can repair damage and restore trust. So for some people, it might look like taking action or even apologizing or making it up to yourself, right? Writing yourself a letter, maybe talking to yourself, self-love, just really recognizing, right, that you're a human being. You're allowed to make mistakes, do things that maybe don't resonate with other people, but you can continue to work on yourself, right? And that's really what that fourth part is really about. And I think that fourth part, once again, is really helpful when you're thinking about putting yourself out there in a way that may be uncomfortable, is reflecting on your learnings and your growth. I think it's so incredibly satisfying when, maybe you say like, a month ago, I would have never put myself out there, in that way. But like now I feel a lot more comfortable doing it. I have a process and I'm not constantly double checking things and double, and constantly like, self-criticizing, right? You've really worked through it. So really just recognizing that, once again, as human beings, we're constantly evolving, right? When you go and check in with yourself, you might have noticed that you've evolved in this way, right? You've been able to shift into working in this different way. And it's the same thing also when we're thinking about self-forgiveness or forgiveness. So I'd really would just love to encourage everyone to think about how they can build or incorporate a self-forgiveness ritual or routine into their day-to-day, right? And so it might look as simple as just telling yourself like, hey, I'm a human. It's cool, sort of working through it that way. For other people, it's like through movement, dancing it off, right? Shaking it off potentially. I've worked with some clients where we literally like shout out, like, I forgive myself, until you no longer feel that emotion or have that a negative emotion associated with what you're doing. Just really think about how can you interrupt, how can you break some of those very negative thoughts around feeling guilty, holding that grudge against yourself. And that's really what's going to help you, once again, get things done and get back to work at the end of the day, right? So I'm not suggesting don't repress it. Don't continue to pile on by sort of bad mouthing yourself or, having any negativity through it or towards it, but really think about how can you work through it in a very constructive way so that ultimately either you can get on with your day or you can go back to working potentially. All right. And once again, I'd maybe love to just sort of stop there and see if anyone has any questions or any thoughts for me. There are just 3 basic things I'd love for everyone just to take away from this conversation, right? The first thing is that I'd love for you just to continue to take the time to get to know yourself, right? And really recognize that you are going to evolve. The things that you're good at are going to evolve. The things that you like doing are going to evolve. The things that you hate are going to evolve. So just take the time to check in with yourself, right? The second thing I'd love to encourage everyone to do is to learn to ask for help in your personal and your professional life, right? And also maybe learn to delegate. We can maybe add that on there as well, right? Just really recognizing that you're not going to be able to build your empire. You're not going to be able to build your career. You're not going to be able to build, your professional life by yourself. So just start, working with it, engaging with it, and really seeing what support could look like for you, right? And last but not least, be kind to yourself. And I think one of the best ways to be kind be kind to yourself and be self-compassionate is really thinking about how can you build rituals and routines that sort of build you up, right? That give you momentum, that give you that motivation so that you can continue to move forward, right? So that's all I actually have for you guys this afternoon for me. I think morning for those of you in the US. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. At this time, I'm more than happy to sort of answer any questions or even just hear any additional thoughts that you guys have about this conversation.